following clip is an excerpt from my appearance on the Lepanto Institute's YouTube channel show just a few days ago. The topic is, for the most part, the Synod on Synodality, and it as a destruction of both the Mass and the Papacy itself. The Synod is clearly attempting to implement the objections to Catholicism of both the Anglican Church and Eastern Orthodoxy. And the worst ideas that you hear from the synodalists in Rome all come from Eastern Orthodoxy. Their worst ideas, except for the James Martin sin, but that comes from the Anglican Church and from the Jesuits, who appeared to be just absolutely taken over by that group of people in general. But you hear this error over and over again, and they come from the Anglican Church and Eastern Orthodoxy, the two groups that the Vatican spends the most time trying to reconcile with. And unfortunately, those attempts at reconciliation never go the way they should, which is teaching the faith and getting them to accept the Vatican, meaning the Catholic Church's historic claims. Because if the historic claims of the Church are true, that the Church was founded on the rock of Peter by Jesus Christ, that Peter, the Pope, the Papacy goes back to Peter, and that it is the source of unity in the Church, of visible unity, and that he was the supreme pastor. If those claims are true, then the Anglican and Orthodox schisms have no grounding. Neither do any of the other Protestant schisms. It is always Peter that they always object to at the end. Always. But instead of trying to teach show this historic evidence, theological evidence for this, the Vatican for 60 years has been making false gains in ecumenical dialogue by trying to surrender on that issue, by raising up the bishops to be more, at least as a body, more equal to the Pope. And when that didn't work, well, as you'll see in this discussion, where that leads. But it also shows that by their own admission and their own track record, they're planning to tinker with the Mass again.
You know, I can't help but come back to the Synod on Synodality and think the whole role of this, the whole purpose of it is to so devalue the papacy that it seems almost a minor like a minor convenience and an afterthought.
I tend to tell people the Synod looks like it's doing two things.
Mm-hmm.
The first is essentially taking the worst ideas of the Anglicans,
right,
and trying to turn that to the Catholic Church. The Anglican Church, which is dying right before our eyes, it's just withering away. I would be shocked if in 25 years there were more than a handful of very conservative Anglicans in Africa, and a few people who, get baptized just because in England, but that's it. But the other thing is, the worst ideas that have been implemented in the Church in the post-Vatican II era have almost exclusively come from the Eastern Orthodox, especially under Francis. Amoris Laetitia's ideas of communion for the divorced and remarried comes from Orthodoxy, comes from Cardinal Walter Casper, who was, since the 1980s, trying to get that done.
Wow.
So, and what do the Orthodox have to do with this discussion of the papacy? Because they don't have a pope.
Mm-hmm.
They have traditionally viewed the Pope, the Roman Pontiff, as the patriarch of the West and the first among equals.
Uh-huh.
And that's, when you read what they want to do to this in the Synod, what a lot of the talk from the Synod working groups is, it sounds like what they want to do to the Catholic Church.
Right.
If you want to know that the consecration did not happen, no matter which Pope did it, including Francis, where he invoked the name of the country, he did it by itself, the one mark that you will know it didn't work, not fully, was that country did not end its schism. It did not submit to the Roman Pontiff. Because in the post-conciliar era, people think the main difference between the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church is an issue of jurisdiction of governing power. And that is a very, very Enlightenment way of looking at the schism.
Right.
It's not just that. It's, do they submit to the shepherd of shepherds? Yes or no?
Right.
Do they rescind their heresies? And yes, there are heresies. After the dogmatic declaration in 1954 by Pope Pius XII, the Orthodox went from agreeing with us on that to suddenly going, well, I don't know all of a sudden because you formally defined it.
Well, isn't it interesting that Pope Francis handed the bones of St. Peter, or at least some of the relics of St. Peter, over to the Orthodox. He's now talking about opening the way for changing the date of Easter. You've covered this in your show.
Mm-hmm.
Changing the date of Easter to align with the Orthodox, not to bring them to us, but to become more like them.
Right. And people think, oh, that's not a big deal. Yeah, it is
Mm-hmm.
a big deal. It's surrendering on a key dogmatic issue.
Right.
Who changed when we celebrate Easter? It was when the Gregorian calendar was put into place.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you cannot tell me that the issuing of a calendar that changes how we measure the passage of time is not an act of papal infallibility. A lot of this, when we talk about liturgy, culminates in another thing you keep hearing from the Synod and from authorities in Rome, which is further liturgical changes that will make the Mass more universal. And if you've been paying attention to voices warning about this for decades, this is one of those things they've been talking about quietly to try to change the Mass in such a way that non-Catholics would feel fine about going and receiving communion at it. That's something they've wanted. The simple is often what they call it.
The whole Amazonian Synod, which was kind of a test run for a regional synod to go along with this general overall synod on synodality. It was like a mini synod within the context of the larger synods. And what did they say that they needed to do? They need to create their own Amazonian rite. So they've been working on this new rite of the Mass to fit their regional people so that it's more conducive to their customs and their outlooks and their culture and what they look like and how they dress and everything else. So they want to restyle the Mass to look more like the customs of the local American Indians.
The local devil worshippers, honestly.
It's really what it boils down to. For instance, we see so much now where people are starting to incorporate smudging in the Mass. There was a video, I think you saw it too, of some Indian conducting a fire ceremony right in front of an altar. This was a couple of months ago. They're incorporating these things into the Mass, but it's superstition. It's absolutely superstition because there are no sacramental qualities attached to whatever it is that they're doing. They're not actually praying. They're conducting their ceremonial tribal dances, and they're making it now a part of the Mass. But the larger context here is within the Synod on synodality, they're trying to say what we want is to have an establishment in a local area where people establish what they want to think, how they want to conduct themselves within the setting of the church. And at some point, this also includes morality, because if you look at Amoris Laetitia, everything about this papacy points to these changes, this general change on a regional level. Amoris Laetitia gives permission for bishops to say, you know what? You divorced and remarried Catholics under certain circumstances, yeah, you can go up and receive communion, even though you've not had your marriage annulled, your previous marriage annulled, and even though you've not had your current marriage regularized or recognized by the church. It's, it's up to your own conscience.
Right, and you see this, you can see a trickle down effect from that too, because if all of a sudden you're not an adulterer for doing those things, then the number one sin, according to confessors who will talk about this stuff openly, confessed by both men and women, is self-abuse, right?
Right.
And how many times have you heard from a 60s era priest? Do you maybe you have a friend struggling with this, or maybe you yourself have heard this? Well, this is addressed to the general audience here. That it's not a big deal. Just go receive communion, say an act of reparation, and then go receive.
Right.
You see how this effect goes down the entire cascade of typically sins of the flesh. Weirdly, those are the ones that they want to play fast and loose with. Although they also ignore usury and those kinds of other kind of materialist sins as well, because again, USAID, Catholic Charities, and the fact that, as I covered in the live stream on my channel like 3 weeks ago, when you look at the history of the relationship of the United States government with the Vatican, it goes back to World War II.
Yeah.
30 years before that, Benedict XV tried to at least pause World War II during Christmas, and nobody listened to him. He tried to end the war altogether, and nobody listened to him. 30 years later, things were so bad in Europe that the Pope was willing to make some deals with the U.S. government and others, and it just sort of stuck around till today. If you want to see that interview in full, it's about an hour long. You can find it on the Lepanto Institute YouTube channel. I will put a link in the comments below, as well as a link at my show notes at returntotradition.org if you want to see it for yourself. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And, as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.